bonsoir et bienvenue aux personnes qui sont en ligne. Merci à celles qui sont dans la salle. On va commencer cette deuxième partie qui est la table ronde, toujours sur la thématique de la durabilité. Et pour introduire ce moment, je passe la parole à la directrice du programme de formation continue, professeure Sylvia Neff.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear students, I'm very happy to welcome you to this roundtable that closes the series of conferences on the Gulf region that we had organized this spring in collaboration with the Gulf Research Council, who is represented tonight by Vera Lalchevska. We are very happy that this first initiative has been followed by the signature of a memorandum of understanding, and that this first experience between the University of Geneva and the GRC will continue in the years to come, hopefully. Now, I hope you will enjoy the roundtable tonight, which is really the closing moment of this very rich series of conference. And for this, I will hand over the mic to Dr. Oumansour, who will introduce the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Neff. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us at this roundtable about sustainability in the Gulf countries, hosted, of course, in the Gulf countries. And it's a pleasure for me to be here with you and moderate this roundtable, which centers around sustainable development strategy in a region that is traditionally known for being a worldwide supplier of fossil fuels and heavily dependent on fossil energy. Our guests will highlight the initiatives, different policies and concrete measures implemented by the Gulf countries, carry out green economy, then also highlight their assets, but also the challenges they encounter, and of course taking into consideration the global issues such as the current crisis triggered by the war in Ukraine. We have four distinguished panelists that I will now introduce, starting by Dr. Mohammed Abdelraouf, who is a Sustainability Research Program Manager of the Gulf Research Center. He holds a PhD in environmental economics. He published various policy papers on different environmental issues in MENA region and authored books, among which the last book entitled "Sustainability in the Gulf Challenges and Opportunities," Routledge, 2018. Dr. Vera Lalchevska, a politologue and senior researcher at the Gulf Research Center Foundation in Geneva, where she is also in charge of strategic partnership. She holds a PhD in development studies from Geneva's Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies. She co-founded several NGOs and worked at a handful think tanks. Dr. Manal Shehab is an applied economist with recognized expertise in energy, economic and resource sustainability and resource exporters, focusing on the Middle East. She is an academic visitor at St. Antony's College, Oxford University, and founding director of SHEAR Research and Advisory. Dr. Noura Mansouri is a research fellow at CAPSARC, a research affiliate at MIT, where she completed a postdoctoral research fellowship. Let's now turn to the first question I might ask, starting with Dr. Vera. When looking at the sustainable development goals through much larger lens, do the Gulf countries share the same strategies and evolve at the same pace, or do we observe a certain diversity, as is the case in other fields? In other words, are there pioneering states in the sector or not?
Thank you for for your question, and thank you for inviting me. And also, I wanted to thank the University of Geneva, and in particular, Professor Naif, as well as Esther for their very eager collaboration with us, and for their eagerness to cover the Gulf region, which is not very well represented in Europe, especially in the academic world. And as we see nowadays, the Gulf is playing a very major role in the political economy and in the perhaps changing world order. And so we're very happy to have received their collaboration and to be here among you. With regards to the question, if I may, I'd like to just retrack. I know that you have all just been listening to a lot of topics about climate change. However, I wanted to go back and look again at the history of sustainable development. So if we could please go on to slide number 2, Esther. I wanted to talk about the history a little bit. The idea of sustainable development started 15 years ago, as we know, and it was the landmark year was 1992 at the Rio conference. I'd like to read some of the opening paragraphs of that Rio Declaration. As you can see, what was most important was that human beings are at the center of the concerns for sustainable development, and that they're entitled to a healthy and productive life. It is also very important that the sovereign right to exploit natural resources pursuant to their own environmental developmental policies, and the responsibility to ensure that activities within their jurisdiction of control do not cause damage to the environment of other states. We can go on to slide number 3. So principle 5 of the Rio Declaration is that all states and all peoples shall cooperate in the essential task of eradicating poverty. So poverty was the focus as an indispensable requirement for sustainable development in order to decrease the disparities in the standards of living and so on and so forth. The special situation and needs of developing countries, particularly least developed and those most environmentally vulnerable, shall be given priority. And then lastly, perhaps slide number 4. Sorry, could we go back one slide? Principle number 7. In view of the different contributions to global environmental degradation, states have common but differentiated responsibilities. The developed countries acknowledge the responsibility that they bear in the international pursuit of sustainable development in view of the pressure their societies place on the global environment and of the technologies and financial resources they command. So generally speaking, I just wanted to point out that this is about sustainable development and that humans are first and foremost, and that the majority of the population is in the developing and not the developed countries. So I'd like to maybe focus a little bit on the other types of sustainable development. In my understanding, one of the most major problems today is actually plastic waste. I don't know if we can if we can click on that link to show minute number. We can start it at 0:55.
About 8 million metric tons go into the ocean every year. That's the equivalent of one city garbage truck dumping a load of plastic into the ocean every minute of every day.
This is the story of plastics. It is fossil fuels finding a new form and finding a new place to flow through the economy.
The surge of attention to plastic pollution is pretty striking. I believe we're at a tipping point right now. I've seen more policy change globally in the last 8 months than I've seen in 20 years of my career. Because not only are governments getting pissed off, but companies are recognizing they can't get away with it anymore.
I don't think they can keep on tricking people forever.
In fact, only 2% of recycled waste is actually effectively recycled, and that most of that garbage goes to the developing countries, in particular China, Africa, and India. And so that is one of the biggest challenges in my belief. It is also the fact that plastic waste is merely fossil fuels finding a new form and finding a new place to float through the economy and through the environment. So we have to be careful about when we talk about climate change and how are these countries that are producing oil, how are they going to reconvert their factories? And if they do in plastics, then we have a bigger problem than we have today. And that's going to be the plastics challenge of tomorrow. Another big challenge in my belief, we can go to the next slide, is toxic waste and especially electronic waste. Again, the developing countries have become the garbage bag for this waste. And as you can see, the biggest concern for developing countries has not been the climate change, but poverty, due to the fact that they were the world's free supermarket for natural resources, and now they have become the world's free dump for toxic and non-biodegradable waste. Their lands were first depleted, and now they're polluted and with hazardous to health. It is time that we all recognize this this problem and put in the financial resources and human capital to change this. Sorry, next slide. So without further ado, I wanted to just mention this is why 20 years after Rio, we had the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Sustainable Development Goal #1 is to eradicate poverty, and #2 is zero hunger, and then #5 is gender equality. So how did the Gulf Cooperation countries fit into all this? Having in mind that the idea of the Sustainable Development Goals was to ensure that there is more equality on every level, including on the multinational, national, regional, and local levels. Ensuring sustainable development means giving an equal place at the table to all peoples, regardless of their nationality, social status, continent, or gender. It means caring for their health and their environment as much as for your own. In this respect, the Gulf Cooperation countries are by far record winners. We can go on to the next slide. Because even on the goals, they have been lagging behind. They have done giant steps that no other country has matched. And there's an incredible amount of political will among these countries to do better, and this, combined with the resources they have, is exemplary. Here we have statistics from the overseas development from the OECD. And these statistics are from 2008, and you cannot see the numbers on the left side, but it's 0, 1K, 2K, so in thousands of millions of dollars, I believe. And in any case, Saudi Arabia quotes among the top countries in Europe. So without France, UK, United States, it's among the highest. So, for example, in 2014, Saudi Arabia's overseas development assistance was almost $15,000 million, and whereas the others are on average 4,000. So that gives a little bit of its perspective. Some other facts, and I'm focusing on Saudi Arabia as a perfect example, which has done a lot of reform. Just some other facts to put into perspective globally. Saudi gives more development aid than many Western countries. Between 76 and 87, Saudi development aid amounted to $49 billion US. So these numbers were billion, sorry. In 2006, it was reported that the country was the biggest per capita donor in the world. This is in 2019, Saudi Arabia, through the Saudi Fund for Development, had become the third largest donor to UNRWA, as it donated $800 million since 1994. In 2012, the fund provided support to maintain Palestinian refugee camps in other countries. In 2018, Saudi Arabia was among the top overseas development assistance providers. In 2020, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Aid ranked Saudi Arabia as the 6th among the world's most generous donors, providing 3% of the world's humanitarian aid. In 2021, it ranked 3rd among the world's top donors, with its share of humanitarian assistance having risen to 5%. Okay, so I think we can just move on to the next slide. These are some statistics on poverty. We can just move on. The next slide, please. So other statistics in terms of sustainable development goals. This is from the Sustainable Development Goals Tracker. It's an organization which tracks all of the goals. And I wanted to focus on gender equality because this is one of the leading main reforms that Saudi Arabia has undergone in recent years. And this is data that compares countries in terms of percentage of firms with top female managers, proportion of seats held by women in national parliaments, and so on and so forth. As you can see, there is no clear divide here. Women are still lagging behind everywhere in the world. There are, for example, no data on certain countries, including the United States, on the percentage of firms with top female managers. In terms of gender equality in employment and economic benefits, for 2020, again, there's no data for the United States. Proportion of women in ministerial positions, this is more or less, let's say, distributed everywhere, with one country being the highest number, and I think that was in Africa, in the middle of Africa. I don't think we can see the color there. So anyway, that's just for general statistics worldwide. Now, in terms of Saudi Arabia in particular, if we can just go to the next slide, please. These are some statistics that have also been exposed by certain missions and embassies who are trying to portray what's the reforms that are being undergone. If we can move on the next. So these are part of the Vision 2030 of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. 90 major human rights reforms over the past few years have been undergone, and women's empowerment constitutes the largest share of those. Next slide, please. This is a picture of the prince who is responsible for a lot of the reforms. We can move on. So who has focused on women and younger generations. I took this quote from the website, and it's a journalist who has actually written this. Exactly a year ago, on June 11, 2017, Saudi women would see the tides change, rewind, and reverse what seemed to be rather inflexible status quo on their rights and roles. On this day last year, Prince Mohammed bin Salman took the helm in Saudi Arabia, and with his leadership role, embarked on a mammoth reformative plan for the life of the kingdom under the country's National Vision 2030. Saudi women's state of affairs was his and the plan's top priority. And so finally, next slide, please. I just wanted to read out a couple, or maybe several of the reforms that have been done, just in terms of legislation. This is huge, and this just gives us, puts into perspective how much has been done, and also highlights when you just look at, perhaps some of the audience can read some of these. Do I have a volunteer? Okay. Anyway, in June 2018, Saudi women officially earned their right to obtain driver's licenses and drive. In terms of work and finance, since February 2018, Saudi women can hold positions in the military, passport controls, and public prosecution offices. In 2018, women entrepreneurs became able to open a business without needing consent of a male guardian. Can we move on to the next slide, please? In 2019, other reforms in the legal infrastructure on equal footing with men, women over the age of 21 may obtain a passport and travel abroad without the permission of a male relative. This is huge for the country. Women may register as a head of the household, etc., etc. Sorry, I think this is the end. So I just wanted to point out, when we're speaking about, and if we go back to the slide number 1, the question is there a sustainable future for the Gulf countries? I want to say not only is there a sustainable future, but they're probably the leaders, because you can see the political will that is behind them to ensure all sustainable development goals. And you can see also that they are putting a lot of human and financial resources, that there are a lot of projects, and that there are concrete actions that are happening. And so with that, I'd like to close my intervention.
Thank you, Vera. So what we keep in mind is, yes, that you are optimistic, and of course they are even leaders in terms of sustainability strategy, and there is a political will to lead this transition. Then focusing, of course, on human being or putting human being at the center. So now I'd like to move to Dr. Mohammed Raouf. If you can, give a word on the strategy, or the GCC's strategy to set net zero to set zero carbon targets, and what economic initiatives or concrete measures have been implemented to meet their commitment.
Thank you for the question, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone, and those online and in person. My special hi to my colleague Vera. And to come back to your questions, just before we come back, just I have one comment of the previous presentation by Vera. The good news that as GRC is accredited to United Nations Environment Program, and we attended in March the United Nations Environment Assembly, and there was a historic decision to start a negotiation to end the plastic pollution. And this is currently ongoing now. They established an open working group from various countries with various observers, which we have the pleasure also to be part of that. So hopefully very soon we'll have a treaty globally to end the plastic pollution, different forms, different types, different industries, the whole life cycle. Coming back to your questions, and also linking it to the previous presentation, yes, in GCC we have, we can say we have traditional and emerging environmental problems. Traditional ones like water pollution, water scarcity, oil pollution, desertification, sandstorms, and so on. Emerging one related to construction and demolition debris, which we have a very booming construction sector across the region. Also, climate change poses a lot of environmental negative impacts on the Gulf region. I recall I heard the last question for the last session, one participant asking about, is it possible to live in the Gulf? So we can imagine currently, but with the global warming, the region might be very difficult, more difficult in terms of further conditions. But the good news that there is a new thinking, a new shift, a big shift in the thinking and in the policies across the region. This is driven by a number of events and reasons in the last couple of years. First of all, with the pandemic hitting the globe and also the Gulf region. And we witnessed we can live in a more environment-friendly atmosphere. We witnessed maybe the environment was the only winner when everything was shut down. The second thing, also the Gulf region faced a number of catastrophics like Shaheen, tsunami, different floods in Jeddah and other places. So this is alerted the region that climate change is real and affecting the region seriously. But at the same time, I think the political will across the region realized there is a good business opportunity related to climate change. So if you speak to any ministry across the Gulf or even the MENA region, they tell you, yeah, we like to be involved in any initiative related to climate change because this attracts a lot of funds in different fields, create jobs and in renewable energy, clean industry, energy efficiency, green mobility, you name it. So we are heading to the future. We are heading, in fact, also all the problems the world witnessed in the last 2 years, was the last one, the Ukrainian-Russian war, brought the future to us very near. So what is green mobility, for instance, which we were expecting to be booming after like 10 years, it started booming now. So what I wanted to say is there is a great shift in the policies, and this is a journey to net zero. A number of countries in the region announced like Saudi Arabia 26 by net zero by 2060, Bahrain by net zero by 2060, United Arab Emirates by 2050. There is a shift in policies related to green mobility, as I mentioned, renewable energy, green Saudi Arabia, green Middle East. There is a great effort in energy efficiency, in buildings, in industries, in transportation sectors. But we must say that it's different from country to country. We have a number of countries that are leading, which are United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Then comes Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. Still, we need to see this shift in policies and the actions and projects in other countries, like Kuwait, for instance. Still, they have a very, unambitious target related to carbon emissions, which is around 7.5% reduction by 2030. This is less than required even by Paris Agreement. But anyway, we can see a big shift in the thinking of policies. On the other hand, they have also the financial tools. Not only that, but they are looking for other international financial tools. It was a surprise for me a few months ago that Saudi Arabia announced they will seek green bonds in order to fund different environmental projects in the countries on their journey to net zero. Still, they need to change the consumers' behavior. Consumers' behavior related to water, energy consumption, to electric cars. This needs a lot of work, and at the same time, of course, needs a continuous awareness and needs also incentives for consumers and for companies in order to come and invest. Still, investment is not there. We know that Saudi Arabia announced a very ambitious plan for green mobility, but maybe up to now they have like only less than 20 charging stations. Tariff system is not there yet. Incentive also is not complete yet. So there is still a lot of things to be done in various GCC countries, but at least we have started the journey, and there is a political will, and there is a very ambitious policies and actions by various countries. If they follow this path, I think they will be one of the leaders in sustainability, especially the region is. The wider MENA region is hosting the Climate Cup in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and next year in 2023 it will be in United Arab Emirates. With all these events happening, I think the region want to say we are playing an important role in the journey to net zero and low carbon economy. I stop now, and I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Raouf. So, if I can sum up in few words, so yeah, there are incentives, both local and the external incentives to carry out this transition, and efforts have been made by different countries in the region in terms of greening the construction sector, as well as transportation. In addition to, you mentioned the need to change the consumption behavior towards a more energy, in favor of environmentally friendly consumption. Thank you. So let's move now to Noura Mansouri. I guess there are multiple challenges that these countries face in terms of their in carrying out their strategy toward sustainable economy. So let's Noura develop her insights about the topic.
Thank you very much, Brahim, for the question. Of course, there are so many challenges when it comes to pursuing sustainability in the region and in the Gulf particularly, and Saudi Arabia, which I'm happy to see has been the case of Vera's presentation and Mohammed's also discussion. So to talk about the challenges, of course, it's the classic balancing between energy security on the one hand, pursuing energy sustainability goal, energy access, SDG 7, and on the other hand, pursuing climate targets set through the Paris Agreement and other international treaties, and the self-defined climate targets, including the net zero target by 2060 and other net zero targets in the region. To balance these requirements, especially hydrocarbon countries that have to take into consideration their oil-based economies, their oil income, sustaining the demand on oil, but at the same time tackling the climate change and looking at ways to have this win-win. And the circular carbon economy provides a strategy that enables really both pursuing the climate targets and also sustaining economic development and sustaining the use of oil, at least for this transition, grand energy transition. And the circular carbon economy was proposed by Saudi Arabia during the G20 2020 presidency and was endorsed by all the G20 countries. It's a new way of mitigating climate change and looking at the emissions, both the CO2 as well as the greenhouse gas emissions from a circular perspective, a circular economy perspective, to transition towards carbon neutrality and carbon circularity. So investments in technologies that enable this carbon circularity and neutrality, such as carbon capture, utilization, and storage, hydrogen, investments in critical minerals, even for renewables and storage, to ensure a smooth energy transition. And in light of the current affairs and the war on the Ukraine, and since the onset of COVID-19, there's been a real example of how priorities shifts, and countries will always prioritize, national security, energy security, and climate change eventually loses salience. So it's important to keep that in mind and plan ahead by keeping all the energy options open, keeping all the forms of energy open. It is really evident by, just a few months ago, we agreed to phase down unabated coal, but when reality hits, when the war in Ukraine happened, European countries who have the most, I would say, idealistic climate targets had to revert to coal, derailing the phase out of coal. And this is a clear example how countries will always shift their priorities based primarily on their national security and energy security. And so this is a reminder that we need to keep all the energy options open. We need to plan for a smooth transition that happens over time and doesn't happen abruptly and disorderly overnight. So I'll leave it there. I know we're tight on time.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Nora. So yes, you talked about the climate targets and yes, to target and to meet their will to meet agreements like international agreements. That also the challenges hampering sometimes obstacles hampering that, such as this necessity to shift in terms of prioritizing perhaps their strategy and the impact, of course, of the Ukraine crisis on, and it's that triggered, of course, the oil, the gas and oil crisis, world crisis. Now let's listen to Manal Shehab. So if you do have any other challenges perhaps these countries may face or encounter, and how about these implications, their implications of such commitments, of course, towards transition on the region and the population of this region. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the question of challenges is obviously really important, and I think very critical for the outlook and the path forward. You're asking about other challenges. I think one of the challenges really, if we take a step back and just kind of look back at the previous development plans that the Gulf had, things like economic diversification in principle is not a new concept. It's existed in these development plans before the big visions, but it existed in development plans for a really long time. So there's always been this vision that this is where we need to go and this is the path that we need to reach. But then in terms of implementation, perhaps was quite a striking difference and a gap between implementation on one side and reality on the other side. And I think when we take now under the banner of these big visions, there are great, as we heard from the previous panelists, there's great political will, there's a lot of investments and initiatives, but I think the real challenge is really how do you then translate these visions and plans into actual reality and objectives that are on the ground achieved. And this is why also, for example, in the renewable energy targets that we have, there's lots of initiatives that each of the Gulf states, each of the country with the Gulf states or within the GCC framework, let's say, has implemented. But each one of them, and mind you, in fairness, the targets are future targets. So, you know, it's unrealistic to say they haven't met the target because the target is not for today. But yet the improvement toward the target is still behind. So I think this is one area where we see a challenge of really transforming from this from these plans to really making it actual, actionable and measurable movements or improvements, so to speak. And then relating to this, I think there's also the challenge that I think the region is now facing, in part, prior to the Ukraine crisis, there was really a multitude of different urgent needs and priorities. So there was we had the need for economic diversification. We needed to make sure that we secure our fiscal balance and fiscal revenue because that was declining when oil prices were much lower since they collapsed since 2014. And then there's also the needs of how do you balance the future and the needs of the growing population, which is, you know, young and vibrant and making the demands. Also in most of the region, a lot of the leadership was for a long time not young leadership. It was also older leadership, and now we see movement towards, you know, younger leaderships in many places. I will mention Saudi Arabia because it had been the case that's been mentioned by the three other panelists before me. So that's a very clear example as well, where there's young leadership and also coming with young ideas and young perhaps solutions for a variant future, because we cannot really implement everything we've done in the past for the future, because the future is different and we're looking for a different future. So I think this is kind of the struggle between then managing these targets, but also the market dynamics that allow the Gulf states to invest in these markets change all the time. And that is a really big challenge, in my opinion, because each of the states have a fiscal policy, what we call in economics a pro-cyclical fiscal policy, which means their spending is very tied to the movement of the budget and the fiscal space. So when oil prices go up, there's a lot of investments and a lot of expenditures, but not necessarily investments in productive capacity. It's more investments in upstream investments for oil and gas. When oil prices go down, then we pull from the savings. So then there is, and a lot of there is welfare payments very generously in the states as well, but these are consumption based and not productive based. So then we now see that when the oil price was down, there was more of an incentive to expedite and accelerate energy transitions, economic diversifications. Now we have a very different economic environment. Oil prices are really high. And the worry here, I think the challenge is, how do you manage that the economic incentive is to invest more in the oil and gas side and not in the energy transition and economic diversification side, while also knowing that in the future, oil and gas prices will fluctuate again, that energy security matters are really also important, that also the energy transition plans of these states can also potentially change some of the geopolitics that exist in the region and the market dynamics. So if we look at how policies have been implemented in the past, the future clairvoyance, so to speak, would suggest that the energy transition and economic diversification projects would suffer, environment would suffer. So the challenge then would be in this, how do you isolate then really investments and support for these big visions that are really necessary for the different reasons we've mentioned, environmental, energy, economic, politics and security, while also at the same time managing what the incentives in the market currently are suggesting. And I think there is, in facing of these challenges, there's obviously a huge opportunity as well. And the interesting thing, I think, that currently in the current oil and gas market, the green energy alternatives become more competitive perhaps with oil and gas, because they're not ridiculously higher prices, they're more or less similar price. But and of course that condition, economic condition, isn't going to stay that way forever. But it is really a point to kind of, again, despite the existing potential incentives, is to push toward investing in the diversification and energy transition plans. And I think for that to also happen, regulation and policy will really need to be implemented. That there's commitment that these big political wills actually are seen through the different actors, because they take time to be implemented, and they need different groups of people and different institutions and different organizations to implement them, that the implementation is a bit separate from the volatility of the oil price market, which had just basically shadowed the economies of the Gulf region for a very, very long time.
Thank you, Manal, for your insights. So in sum, yeah, you say that there are incentives. There is a will, of course, to lead this transition, but at the same time, the challenges need perhaps to find a way to manage between both the needs towards transition, but also to meet the needs of the populations in terms of growing population, of course, and other social and economic challenges. Thank you. Perhaps let me ask a question for all of you, just to pave the way to the question time. what are, according to you, long-term implications of both, I mean, the pandemic and the war, I mean, the Ukraine war that I see as a counter, I mean, we find both of these crises incentives and a challenge towards transition. So who would like to start? It's up to you. To Mohammed, yes.
Thank you. This is very important questions, and yeah, we need to think about this in fact a lot, because it's very ironic. It has on one side the benefit, and on one side the pitfall. Yeah. So the pandemic, definitely it's in favor of environment-friendly projects, green investment, green technology, renewable energy. There is no doubt about that. But when the Ukraine and the region was, the whole world and the region was moving very fast in that. But when Ukraine-Russia war came, then the renewable energy and different green alternative energy is not still mature market. So they couldn't fill the gap for Europe. And we can see that many European countries turned to the Gulf to compensate, to the Gulf and to other countries to compensate the Russian energy supply, natural gas and other sources. This is not in favor of sustainability, not in favor of green transition or energy transition. But I believe this is a temporarily, it will fade away as soon as the war ends. And but for the Gulf region, because this will boost the fossil fuel production, exportation, and all that. But on the long run, also the EU and other countries will realize they need to shift away from fossil fuels. So on the long run, I see the trend will come back again very strong. But on the short and the medium term, this is supporting fossil fuel and slowing a little bit, or at least, you know, making things not clear related to the dependency and energy securities and the role of fossil fuel. But there is no doubt the future will be for alternative. Fossil fuels will be there, but the share will be very minimal. That's my comments.
Thank you. Thank you, man. There is any question?
I could potentially add something.
Yeah. Yes.
I think the pandemic, on an economic level, they both have the opposite effect on the Gulf states, because the pandemic was very costly. There was, demand for oil and gas. The huge drop of the oil prices was also really unprecedented, and also the expenditures that the governments had to put through in the economy to support, whether it's support the business cases or the economic recovery plans, and obviously a lot of the other non-oil resources, which are limited to begin with, had also kind of stopped. So it had a really huge effect. And then the region and the world as a whole was still kind of recovering from that a bit. But then the war happened, and the prices really significantly, also unprecedentedly increased. So then it's like almost in a way, refilling the tanks that were lost or maybe depleted during the pandemic. So I think that is something that also is really an opportunity, if that then a lot of that could be then supported, not in a pro-cyclical fiscal policy like I've explained before, but really into saying, actually, we have all this funds now that's coming from fossil fuel. How can we then use it to support the long-term visions that we have? And then I also think there is a potential implication here as well from the energy side and the environmental side, because also the effect in some instances is also doubling on the people who are most vulnerable, really. Because in the pandemic, we've seen, energy access was also a problem. Now prices are really high. Energy access is even more of a problem. At the same time, one concern that I think is something that the region will have to balance as well, is when they're, let's assume that within the uncertainty that Mohammed just touched upon, that energy transition plans are implemented, how do you balance, again, the needs of the local population? For example, ensuring there is renewable energy for the domestic use, not only for projects that are focusing on exports of, for example, hydrogen, and kind of focusing only on the export side, because then that would not only have implications on the energy transition and energy mix, but also really on the environment. I mean, the region has not just climate change, it's a victim in a way of the global climate change, but also regionally, our consumption is not necessarily making it always better. So there's a balance of making those also more sustainable. But yet also the region has to, I think, still navigate its way to coming out of the pandemic, where potentially it's even geopolitical economic power had come down, to maybe seeing now actually the roles are different, and maybe kind of putting back on what Vera was saying about being a leader in their form, then having that as an opportunity and capitalizing on that, because it really flipped everything from how it was before. But I think this is where the initiatives, again, it's really important that the policies make the initiatives come to objectives, but the objectives have to really consider broader implications other than just how's the economy doing. It's more also how are these other, it's not just net zero, is our environment better, is our water resources being used for the most, and the improvement, are we using more energy than we need, are we, those kind of still other implications on the environment front on this. And of course there's the socioeconomic implications, which I haven't mentioned, and that will, the reform from the socioeconomic plan will continue to become more important. Because job creation is not going away, and energy transitions aren't going to provide sufficient jobs for the needs of the population. So yeah, I think I'll probably end there and pass on to whomever wants the baton next.
Thank you, Manal. Yes, Vera or Noah, would you like to add something, a point?
Thank you, Brahim. I could add to the discussion. I think my colleagues here have discussed it sufficiently, and in my introductory remarks, I also talked about the challenges of reality, and how these events that happen, the onset of COVID-19 and the war on Ukraine really impact the energy transition. It's by disrupting the energy supplies and energy supply chains, impacting rising energy prices, rising food prices to almost a crisis level, and causing inflation and stagflation across the world. I think this is the reality here, and the world leaders shift their attention and their resources towards what's very important and grave to saving the economy, saving the society, and then thinking about the environment. So climate change, as I was saying, ultimately loses salience, and other priorities take priority over that.
Yes, I agree, and I think if I can just add one more thing, I recently the Gulf Research Center Foundation team attended the address of the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, who came here in Geneva to speak at the margins of the Human Rights Council. And it was he who had requested to speak to NGOs, and not, usually this doesn't happen. So it was a very unique event in and of itself. And what he said, Mr. Shahid, who's Minister of, I forget which country, but it was a developing country. What he has done during his 6-month presidency at the General Assembly is basically tried to give a voice to women and to youth. And I remember what he said in the beginning in the quote that I won't forget. He said that COVID has put, basically it put humanity, it gave us a view of humanity at its best and humanity at its worst. At its best, we saw solidarity all over the world, but at its worst, we also saw that while only not even 1/3 of African peoples had been vaccinated, in Europe we were getting the 3rd jab. And so that speaks volumes in terms of what we should be focusing on today. And I would say, again, like we mentioned earlier, sustainable development is about putting humans first and all humans everywhere.
Thank you, Vera. So let's move to, for those who are attending, if they have any question in the room or online.
Bonjour, je me présente d'abord. Thierry Le Salle, désolé, je vais poser la question en français pour plus de clarté.
Pas de souci.
Géographe et journaliste environnemental, je suis basé au Qatar. Je me posais la question, enfin je suis d'accord avec tout ce que vous avez dit sur les efforts qui ont été faits ces dernières années en matière de développement durable, en matière de sensibilisation de la population. Il y a énormément d'initiatives, c'est vrai. Mais par contre, je me pose la question de la gestion de l'eau. Et quand on voit, par exemple, des initiatives telles que le docteur Noura a signalé concernant la plantation de 10 milliards d'arbres en Arabie Saoudite. Au Qatar, c'est 1 million cette année et 10 millions d'arbres d'ici 2030. Il faut de l'eau pour tout ça. Est-ce que c'est raisonnable? Est-ce que c'est durable? On voit aussi les ambitions du Qatar en matière d'agriculture, notamment depuis le siège qui avait été imposé depuis 2017. Le Qatar a développé une ambitieuse politique d'autosuffisance alimentaire en développant le secteur agricole. Est-ce que ce secteur agricole dans un milieu aussi aride est durable? C'est une question. Et puis, je suis curieux aussi d'avoir votre regard d'expert, de spécialiste concernant l'organisation de la Coupe du Monde qui est annoncée neutre en carbone, neutre en plastique. Est-ce que là aussi, ça constitue un vrai modèle de durabilité? Merci.
Thank you for the question. If you allow me, I will take the first question.
Yes.
So the Saudi Green Initiative and the Middle Green Initiative is an afforestation project to mitigate climate change and remove carbon and greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere. And sustainability has been at the heart of it and at the heart of Vision 2030, as well as all the other initiatives for the roadmap towards net zero. And sustainable agriculture is being pursued for these projects. For Saudi Arabia, for instance, a lot of millions of these plants will be mangroves that use seawater. And some of the trees that are on land will be very water efficient crops that don't require watering for 2 to 3 years and can remain in the desert unwatered, and adding, of course, the carbon removal benefit. So this is a sustainable project, and of course, Saudi Arabia is the world's largest desalination market, and the largest consumer of desalinated water is agriculture. So this new project, this Saudi Green Initiative, tackles this problem of water poverty as well as using sustainable agriculture. And we have done a lot of work on this. You may refer to CAPSARC publications. I have worked on a model that maximizes the value of water by using or developing a portfolio of crops in Saudi Arabia, as well as in the UAE and other similar climates, where you choose a portfolio of crops that doesn't require water relatively and gives you the same value, the same benefits, the same environmental benefits, as well as of course nutritious benefits. So this has been taken into consideration.
Thank you, Nora. Manal, yes.
Something on water that I think is not so much on the water in terms of pardon, je vais répondre en anglais. Ça marche?
As you like.
No, parce que the question was in French, so I will address it in English just because of the how the table ronde has been going. I think one also desalination is a critical source of water, but also a critical user of energy. It's high energy, it's energy intensive. There's been a lot of studies showing how much salt, and not just salt, it's brine and other amount of products that come from the desalination, how much of that can actually go on the water level before the ecosystems are affected. And at the moment, the studies I've seen say, so far it's okay, but I think we need to think of, is that in the long term then okay? And is that going to be enough? Because also at the same time, we see, particularly on the less so in the Arab/Persian Gulf, depending on who you are, how you call it, but more on the Red Sea front, we see also investments in trying to make sure there's supports of a lot of the marine biology and the corals, etc. So how are we balancing kind of improving that and saying we're going to have ecotourism and all this other stuff, but at the same time are really the water, which is a huge challenge. It's one of these very challenging realities that the region has to confront very critically. Is what do we do then with the brine, and can we continue our desalination products? And I think here's potentially a role for technology that could become more important. I saw the other day something in, I think it was Morocco, where there's little machines that allow people in the desert to produce water from air. So it's kind of reversing the process. And I think things like that would become really very important, particularly for not so much for industrial scale, but for domestic, for human survival, really, just in small scale in households and remote areas. And I think that also is a very critical, important part of the question on the water and how it is important on the region. And the other question I won't, I'll take a small stab at it perhaps, is I think, yes, the World Cup initiative, sustainability initiative for the Mondial, I think there's a lot of really nice examples of initiatives of how you can make a place and standard and the whole logistics of it really more sustainable than otherwise. And I'm not going to comment about the fact that people are traveling there. I'm just saying about the actual operations. But I think we also need to start thinking of not just having, and you see these examples throughout the Gulf of little models, or maybe not little, they're really big models that are very sustainable, but the rest of the place is not necessarily. And I think what would be then really nice for me, I think, to see, for example, some of these initiatives that are implemented in Doha for the World Cup, can then some of those then stay behind or kind of make it after, become more part of the existing ecosystem. Maybe ecosystem is too big of a word in this case, but maybe just the existing way of operation in Doha, so that really we take it more from just a unique model to an actual kind of, with reduction of plastic, for example. That's a really clear example, right? Or the transport parts of components of the sustainability plan. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Manal.
Not question,
Mohammed,
just quick.
yes.
Yeah, not question. Just I want to. This is a very valid question about water, and as it's truly as Noura, we can have a lot of saline agriculture, like mangroves and other products that as these are tested. Of course, there is a limit. There is the carrying capacity. We can use also indigenous and local plants. So in principle, it can be achieved, but of course, it's very valid, and we need to calculate the exact carrying capacity. Just quickly, it would be very good if Qatar managed to make it the first zero carbon or carbon neutral mondial. It will be, there is a lot of initiatives, a lot of, offsetting, a lot of things that can be done. Hopefully they can manage. And
okay, so thank you. Well, disconnected. Thank you, Vera, thank you, Mohammed, thank you, Noura, and Manal, for your interesting insights about sustainability in the Gulf countries. And I will let Esther just conclude.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Merci Brahim de votre modération. Merci à chacune de nos invités. Et merci à ceux et celles qui sont ici avec nous. Alors, vous allez beaucoup nous envier parce que nous, on va terminer avec un apéro aux saveurs de l'Orient et on va bien penser à vous. Et j'en profite tout simplement pour dire que notre programme d'été est en ligne aussi pour les personnes qui sont intéressées par nos cours. Et puis, le programme de la session prochaine sera bientôt en ligne. Donc voilà, merci à chacune et merci aux personnes qui ont suivi ce cycle de conférences depuis le début. Et comme l'a dit la directrice du programme, ce n'est pas la fin. Au contraire, hein, je pense que des choses intéressantes s'annoncent autour du Golfe. Hein. On a compris l'importance de cette région pour le monde en fait, et puis pour cette question de durabilité qui nous préoccupe et qui va nous occuper longtemps d'ailleurs. Donc, on ne fait que commencer avec le Golfe, on va dire. Donc, merci à tous et à toutes.
Merci.
Et à bientôt.
Au revoir. À bientôt.
Merci à tous. Au revoir.
Au revoir.